Many of you are very familiar with our first speaker, Dr. Charles Porter. Dr. Porter is a globally recognized expert in real estate and water rights. His extensive work includes numerous publications in Texas groundwater, and his expertise has guided many water districts and landowners through complex legal challenges. Beyond his professional accolades, Dr. Porter is a trusted and valued friend of TAG. Today, he will be sharing his expertise on groundwater rights in Texas. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Porter to the stage.
Thank you, Adam. Thank y'all. Give me just a second. Old friends and new, I've had the privilege of doing this a couple of times. I really do enjoy it. Today, I'm going to do a little different. We're going to talk about groundwater rights, to lead into the panel that's going to be very important after us. I'm going to go back into some things that a fellow who's been in heaven for a number of years wrote a few years ago about groundwater. And I'm going to talk to you about a variety of different headaches there are that I still see out there that have been around for a long time. Recently, I gave a speech for the A&M Real Estate Center in San Antonio at the land conference, and they named it Water Rights and Water Wrongs. And I think we've got a bunch of water wrongs still out there. I spent a lot of time around Presidio looking at what's going on with the 1944 treaty with Mexico. And not everybody's wrong and not everybody's right there, but it is a nightmare for the valley, I can guarantee you. So, with no ado, some of y'all may have heard of a professor at UT Law School named Corwin W. Johnson. You can pull up his articles. I'm going to bring up a couple of things in it as we go into thinking about what rights are. He was, I think, a not as well-known professor discussed about groundwater law, but in 1982, he brought up several things he thought were problems then, okay? His problem in this article, and this was for the Natural Resources Journal when they're talking about transboundary aquifers and problems with the Mexico border. At St. Edwards, y'all may know I ran water workshops that all our juniors class members had to go through every couple of years. 700 students. One of them was transboundary aquifers, where we did mediations over the whole semester, many mediations about transboundary aquifers. We still ignore transboundary aquifers, okay? We got the Waco Bosun, we got others around the United States. We've not studied them enough. Anyhow, here's what Professor Corwin Johnson said. He died in 2004. He talks about inadequacies in groundwater law. Virtual absence of law resolving conflicts among pumpers. We're getting there a little bit. Lack of coordination of groundwater and surface water rights. You've heard me talk about the conjunctive relationship of groundwater and surface water, right? A couple of sessions ago, I think two of the interims charges a couple of sessions ago asked us to kind of think about how we deal with that conjunctive relationship. We've not gotten there because it's very, very complicated. Okay, he talks about some other things, and I'll just hit the highlights. Absence of any program to determine and assure optimum rates of depletion of non-charging aquifers. Some progress in that. And he also comes up with, I think, really important, impacts of deficiencies of Texas groundwater law upon the Mexico-Texas border. It is a tremendous crisis in the lower Rio Grande Valley. Now, you probably heard about the sugarcane plant closing, laying off 500 people. There's no water, there's almost no water in Amistad or Falcon. Part of that's because of the Rio Conchos. They've got 195,000 new acres of irrigation up the Rio Conchos in Mexico. And guess what? That whole treaty has no penalties on either side. So we got a headache there. Anyway, I thought it was interesting. Secondly, he wrote another one. Now, just a couple of things. In 1986, the continuing voids in Texas groundwater law are concepts and terminology to blame. No judicial protection of water wells from lowering water levels by pumping of other wells. And he goes on. I think it's interesting at the back, because I'm going to talk about ownership and what it means. He talked about Dean Frank Trelease, who I quote sometimes from another law school. He says, there is ownership of groundwater. We know that. But one of his observations was very important. If we were to say ownership of property gives the right to do with it as the owner pleases, and reason from there, we could reach all kind of absurd results. So we know we need to have some regulation. We need to have some regulation out there and some fair regulation. Now, I see there's still problems out there, and we know. From my point of view as a real estate expert, and having been a real estate developer and investor for years, far as groundwater goes, we're still having disputes about, transfer of groundwater from one area to other, someone leasing private groundwater and going through the process of transferring someplace else. The biggest example is Wimberley, Texas. I knew people that had the landowners there. I knew friends in Wimberley, family members. Had a guy that had a groundwater well that filled up a swimming pool, and he fought everybody as far as my friends, the ranchers, been there for 100 years, finally getting a little bit of money for their water, not letting it be transferred to Buda. Buda went away. You'll hear me say again, in these water transactions, time is especially of the essence in a water transaction. If it takes the TCEQ a year and a half or 3 years sometimes, they're better about it now. If Adam and I had some rights to the Rio Grande or another river and I want to transfer those rights to him for a year and lease them for a year, I can't wait a year and a half for that permit or 2 years. I can't pay $300,000 for legal fees. And I'm not knocking the attorneys. They need that money. But we don't fund the TCEQ enough, which some of y'all might disagree with me about that. Just like we don't fund the Real Estate Commission enough. They triage their work. Real Estate Commission investigators first triage all the people that are stealing money from folks online, right? They don't get into as much as they have about ethical behavior. Now, see if this will work. Here you go. Y'all seen this before. We're not Rhode Island. I spent a lot of time in New York this summer because I've got some kids up there, up the Hudson River Valley. One size won't fit all in Texas, right? Never's going to fit. We like local control. I do a lot of expert witness work, 760 cases now since '87, and I see different business cultures and different legal cultures across this state. Well, the worst drought in Beaumont history is 15 inches of rain. Well, that's better than El Paso gets in a good year, right? So you can't have a one-size-fits-all. And here's the big question that's in one of my books. How do you manage a resource that's fleeting, crosses national boundaries, and evaporates into the air? It's hard to do. I remember when Will Wilson and A.A. White wrote an article in Southwestern Law Journal back in the 50s that said, it's great if you do own the groundwater, but you can't brand it, you can't fence it, right? So how do you set property rights about that? Another problem I see these days is, not all Texas has a groundwater district, and where there are areas where there's a district and another district that has regulation and district does not have a groundwater district, then you've got a conflict there because you're trying to manage the same aquifer. I hear that a lot. I ran the Lone Star Water Conference for years in Brenham. One of our most controversial meetings with 350 people was, should Washington County have a groundwater district? And I can tell you all kinds of stories about how that went about for 8 hours. They have not chosen to have one. And of course, I want to remind everybody without a doubt that we can adapt, we can change. All these decisions we're making are human-based. We're under a tremendous challenge in Texas. Tomorrow, Austin's going to be 107 degrees. I don't care how much water you put on your stuff. It evaporates, right? You guys and gals that live out in West Texas, when it rains, it evaporates, right? We're not paying attention to it. And I'm not going to I'm not casting any aspersion on anybody in the legislature. But this year, our interim charges on both sides have really nothing substantial about water. But you go to Blanco, Texas, and you look at those drought charts, it's been a brown hole for 2 or 3 years. And guess what? There's a lot of people moving to Blanco, right? We got to wake up to it. Now, we're 14 years away if we started a project right now and funded it to a desal plant on the Gulf. 14 years away. That's assuming that we get past the right-of-way problems and all the other problems. So where are we right now? We've got to deal with groundwater. You are the most important people to the future of the state right now because surface water is allocated. Period. And the public needs to know that. Remember this group? I've been a member here since 2007, which time moves pretty fast. I'll tell you, in 2015, we got the legislature, after 65 years, to add one little sentence to the disclosure notice. Are you in the groundwater conservation district or not? After 65 years. And we actually had some resistance to it. Took 2 years of all the committees to get together to get it through the legislature. We're still not making progress. I've worked 4 years to get just some notices of the promulgated real estate contracts. The other thing that'll solve it forever, and that is if the Texas Land Title Association would change their procedure and encourage their members on Schedule B of the title commitment for title insurance, if you're going to buy a piece of property, put in there, subject to the groundwater rules and regulations of the Evergreen Groundwater District. That catches every single transaction in Texas. And guess what? we've not had one gripe at all since we changed that in the property code to the disclosure notice. And I figure right now, when you figure a couple of brokers and buyers and sellers, 35 to 40 million people have seen that sentence at least, right? Most of them may check don't know. Well, they ought to know, right? They ought to know that there's a groundwater conservation issue. They ought to know there's some regulation to deal with. All those things need to be known. And I've expressed this very strongly on my committees at TREC. I was chairman of the Education Standards Advisory Committee. I've expressed it to the commissioners, and I'll shut up about it. I'm going to, before I go to heaven, something's going to happen in those notices, because nothing's more important than water to the value of land. Who cares if Charles Porter makes a nickel on his water? What we care about is our most cherished social value. In fact, I had somebody not want me to use the word cherished, but doggone it's education in school in Texas, free education through the 12th grade. We started with the Republic of Texas. It's still there. Half our ad valorem taxes go to that. But doggone it, if the water goes away in an area, what happens to that ad valorem tax base? Then they're going to have to find some other way to be funded. And that frustrates me, because the only hope for our children is a better education in this world. All right, you know these things. You know, I talk about water ignoring political boundaries. You know the basic things there. This is my newest book. I actually got a $73.27 royalty check the other day. Kind of happy about it. Took me 4 years to do it. It's supposed to be 7,000 pages. They cut it back to 300, thought it's too complicated. But it does have a good idea. I looked at every state in the union, and I picked some certain states like Texas, California, and others to highlight. And I have some chapters in there that may be of interest to you as you go along. One of them is ownership of water. Does it really matter? Don't try to buy this book. The college textbooks, they want $90 for it. I'll give you one if you want one. But the bottom line is I talk about, does it really matter? And I'm going to go through it a lot, but you know, if ownership doesn't mean you can do everything you want to with it without paying attention to regulation, but the regulations are too much, then there's that question about is it taking or not, right? How do we do that? How do we balance that out? That's critical, and y'all are right at the epicenter of it at all times, right? You're right there every single day. We've got to figure out a way to use our groundwater in a sustainable way environmentally, but anything we do with it has to be financially sustainable also, right? And y'all know I wrote that article a few years ago in 2013 about how I was frustrated that groundwater districts are poorly financed. Still drives me nuts to hear how sometimes the money's not there. But I wrote a little chapter about ownership, because does it really matter? In a way it does, and in a way it doesn't, and it depends. Now, what do we mean by groundwater rights? That's Olton, Texas. I went up there and did a study before I wrote an article in the Panhandle Plains Historical Review about the history of the Groundwater Conservation Act. I actually went up there and interviewed some 94-year-old women. It was wonderful. They came out with notebooks, with notes and things about how they knew the fellow mister that was behind this first legislation. Groundwater is kind of important up there, as you know. Without it, you're not going to grow water in Littlefield, Texas. Cotton. You know, you got to have it. And we've got, hey, like it or not, the aquifer's going down. Now, a right is a power or privilege held by the general public, usually as a result of a constitution, statute, regulation, judicial precedent, or other type of law. We've all got rights. You know, right now we're talking about correlative rights. Y'all are being quiet and listen to my big mouth. There's a correlative right, you know. I'm going to go tonight and be inducted as Grand Knight of the Knights of Columbus at my church, and I'm going to try to control the group that one person speaks at a time, right? That's a correlative right. We don't really recognize correlative rights here yet. Don't know how we do it. Then again, I always thought it was interesting. I don't speak Spanish very well, but it's interesting how you look at right, straight. What's derecho? Right, straight, erect, or upright. Derecho and derecha, kind of the same, going right to the right or going straight. Izquierda is a different word, very different, right? Going to the left. It's like that old, how my dad used to make fun of one of my uncles because he's left-handed. I don't know where that came from, something from somewhere. So it's interesting. Here are the old questions. How do you determine fair and justice water policies for all Texans? How do we balance the common good of the people while protecting individual property rights? And that, to me, is the kicker. And the other one I want to throw in, I really think we need to think about it. Y'all all I think if you remember, we get Irrigation Leader magazine, right? There's a great article about what's going on in Mexico right now, and that's where I got in the last 5 years, 195,000 more acres are now under center pivot in the Rio Concho upstream. And when you come if you notice the Rio Grande, there's just enough water to move the silt through El Paso. It's like your finger when it gets to Onagua and Presidio, and then it used to become an arm in width, right? Because the Rio Conchos fed it. Ain't no water in the Rio Conchos much anymore. I was down in Presidio, I'll tell you, it's a funny story, with Brad Bracewell, my old attorney, and a couple other guys, and we wanted to go see the confluence of the Rio Concho and the Rio Grande. Now, I'm a Texan, goes back 6th generation, American citizen. Bracewell's an American citizen. Tom Monroe's an American citizen. Brad's wife, Kathy, was with us. And we want to go over there and see it. Well, we go up there, and there's a big no trespassing sign with a gate open. So I said, well, I came all the way. I want to go see that confluence. Because the last picture I have of Google Earth is 2 years old. So I went through there and got stopped immediately by some Homeland Security person. But they said, oh, well, let's go over and take a picture. Well, another guy comes up and stops us again with guns, says, y'all celebrities or something? No, sir, I'm a professor from St. Edwards. I want to see what's going on in the Concho and the Rio Grande. He wouldn't let me go take a photograph of it. And now what we've done around that area, because of the problems with immigration, we have denuded everything about 100 yards back. We've killed the riparian zone completely. We've dug another ditch between the Rio Grande and about another 50 yards out that's deep, so if someone comes across the water, then they fall into a ditch. But we killed most of that riparian zone. I guess killed it with Agent Orange or something. I don't know what's going on, but doggone it, we need to pay attention to that. And Carlos Rubenstein and I have talked a long time about, what do we do? The people in Mexico don't trust us for all kinds of reasons. It goes back a long. I had a ranch in Mexico. I know how they felt a lot of times about our attitudes. And how do we tell the people on the Rio Conchos, they have a $8 billion economy now up there, that they need to quit growing alfalfa, quit growing crops? It's a very hard thing to do. Our best friends on the face of the earth ought to be the Republic of Mexico or the United States of Mexico, but we don't have it. Again, I'm sorry, I'm preaching a little bit about it. Water doesn't run down here, it runs towards money. Why do I like the fact that the farmer owns groundwater? Because I got to tell you, on my farm on Cibolo Creek in Wilson County, if I didn't own my groundwater, I'll tell you who's going to own it. The biggest corporate entities of all will buy every bit of our groundwater. It's going to happen. So I've got a chance at least, right? And I think it's David Weber passed away a few years ago, the most preeminent Spanish colonial historian at SMU, head of the Southwestern Studies program. He grew up in New Mexico. He understood water. He understood the problems with water. Ed Vaughn, who passed away now, 2007 water plan. We don't have enough existing water supplies. Good old Kirk Holland, dear friend of ours, not enough firm yield. 2007, 2009, nothing's changed. It's just gotten worse, right? At least from my perspective. It really has gotten worse. I don't know. I'm not a climate change person. I'm not a scientist like that. But I know one thing. I hadn't worn a sweater to a football game since I was 12 years old in Texas. And I mean, when it's 108 in Austin this week, I don't go to my farm in Wilson County during August. I drop by to make sure there's no squatters. But there's snakes, which is fine. They don't scare me. They got it right. Everything's armed for battle with a sticker, and it's just hot and miserable. I can't put enough water in my tanks. I mean, it's kind of an amazing thing. Now, let's keep going forward. Who's responsible for groundwater districts? Of course, y'all are. But not all of Texas is elected to be in a groundwater district. In some areas, maybe there's not enough groundwater to have a district. I don't know. Most Texans are against transferring groundwater out of their district. And I don't think we really know how many exempt wells there are. I know there's task forces working on it. I'm going to go out to West Texas on a new case where there's a big oil well leak that leaked and damaged hundreds, I don't know how many tens of thousands of acres, and destroyed a whole stream going through 3 ranches. I don't care if they clean it up. It creates a stigma now, and anybody that goes to sell that ranch someday needs to disclose the fact that that happened. That's going to cause a wedge for that person buying it. I want to go into a little bit real quick since I've got a couple extra minutes. Oops, going the wrong way, sorry. I wrote this article about groundwater districts. Some of you have seen it maybe in the Panhandle Plains Historical Journal, about the history. After the 30s, we went through a long process where a lot of people had said that the Ogallala is going down so much, we've got to control it better, scared everybody to death with the Dust Bowl and all the other problems in the Depression. These two fellas, Buford Jester and Price Daniels Sr., said right after the war, we're going to use all our power to change these laws of water in Texas. And part of that was to take away any even thought that groundwater is owned by the private person. Scared everybody up in the high plains pretty much. That's where our law came from. This fella, actually, in 1947, I think he's in heaven too, and never met him, but he actually had a bill to take over ownership of groundwater for the state of Texas. It went to committee for maybe, maybe less than 2 weeks, and it went to the dead box after that. So it didn't quite work out, right? This is the fella, Doc Holt of Olton. That's why I went up there. He was the sponsor of the bill in 1949. He's a World War I machine gunner veteran. He had coached the women's volleyball team up there, and they had what was called, like y'all know about, mule and donkey basketball during the winters. He'd coached that team. Pretty interesting about him. Back in those days, you know, he was an early rising farmer, and this is from an old article in the Austin Statements. Early rising farmers catch city boys asleep. There's still that conflict between urban and rural, right? Right? In those days, everybody could, all the lobbyists could be on the floor of the House or Senate. You'll just have a pack full of people in there. It had to be chaos. But this is what was really important to me, and that is that Dolph Briscoe, his parents didn't want him to run for office in 1949. But look what he said: I was not going to let the state tell a farmer how much water he could pump out of the ground. Now, D.B. Briscoe, his grandson, was a colleague of mine at St. Edward's, and I helped him helped him get introduced there. He has a PhD from UT in history now. He's teaching at A&M San Antonio. But this man was correct. I think this is one of the main reasons he joined the legislature at that time. So he finally got the bill to pass, okay? And that's Buford Jester signing it, I.B. Hope behind him, Durward Manford and others, Governor Briscoe on the other side. Shortly after this was signed, Buford Jester died of a heart attack. I think our only governor that died in office. Anyhow, it's there now. We didn't have a lot of districts until later in the 50s and 60s, but now we're at 101 now, I think. And I think that's where we are. You don't need to read this. You can go back and get this for free. That's the study I did on groundwater finance. Remember, there were only 2 or 3 districts that had more gross revenue than a tennis shoe store in Barton Creek Mall. At that time, Brewster County, I don't know if somebody's here from, I think they told me they had a $13,000 budget. That's not enough, folks, right? It's not enough. Texans want some regulation that they don't want to fund it. Texans want some regulation, don't want to pay taxes, And if you're a district that doesn't have a bunch of fees, it makes it kind of tough, right? But our most precious resource in Texas, outside of oil and gas, and I could argue it's more so than oil and gas, it's groundwater. We ain't going to be here without water, right? Period. Basic exempt use, you know all this. This frustrated me beyond all belief. I have every bit of respect for those people having that opinion, but that's not about water. That's about not wanting any growth around Bastrop, right? We don't want to wait in line. We don't want to wait in line at a Round Rock Donuts anymore. We don't want to wait in line to get a cup of coffee. We don't want these people coming here. It's like Doug Miller used to say, remember the member of the legislature from Comal County? He said, it ain't about water, it's about growth. That's why I wrote my 3rd book, Public Water Policies, the Ultimate Weapons of Social Control. What do you think's going on at the federal level right now? We're going to have another change, whoever's the new president, another change to the Waters of the United States rule, right? It's like an alien changing in one of these space movies. It changes with Obama, changes back with Trump, changes back with Biden. It's going to change again. Biden made it real clear. The first thing he did when his first executive orders was rewrite the Water of the United States bill to make sure, I think the intent was to be able to control any kind of water of the United States and say, just like he'd say, like the Corps did to Hawks when he's digging peat moss, Hawks versus the U.S. Corps. He's 90-something miles, I've seen anywhere from 90 to 100 miles away from a river in Minnesota. They tell him he's got to have a Corps of Engineer permit. Now, he sued about that, and the first thing the Corps said was, and I'm not a lawyer, I'm not practicing law. Corps said, rightly, he hadn't made an application yet. We hadn't turned him down. Well, that cost $200,000 to $300,000 in a long time. So the Supreme Court said he could go ahead and sue now. But I'm telling you right now, I teach a class about WOTUS. I had a special, one of our congressmen come down to a special conference I had about WOTUS. He didn't understand it, tried to sell us Chevrolets, which was fun. But doggone it, you know, that intent is, think about it. If they make me as a farmer on Cibolo Creek, which I am a pertinent to that creek, make me go to them for a permit for a stock tank, I got a problem, right? And they'll say that, oh, by the way, you're a farmer, you're exempt. But read that 145-page, 3-column rule that's come out. And go back and look where it says exempt. I'm exempt as long as I don't change my crop. And I still got to go get a ruling. So what does that do to me as a real estate broker? Do I disclose that to a buyer? You better go talk to the Corps. I think I'm going to call the Corps. I promise y'all I did that a couple years ago. I'm scared to. I don't think I'll get an answer. I never get an answer from them. One of the things that scared me the most when I was head of the committee to rewrite the National Association of Realtors water policies back during the pandemic, I was privy to a conference call with the head of the EPA, the head of the Corps, and all these other stakeholders. And one of the major stakeholders of the United States, I was a little guy in there, I didn't say a word, but said, wait just a second, now you're telling us how you interpret the Water in the United States rule. But our local regional office does it differently. Here's what they do. You know what the guy in Washington said? Yeah, that's a problem for us. They kind of act on their own. What do you mean act on your own? That's scary for somebody to make those kind of decisions, I think. And of course, I want clean water. Don't get me wrong. I want the best clean water possible. But doggone it, we've got to be fair to people somehow. And we've got to get the public behind everything we do, right? Our laws and rules have got to be transparent. As a real estate broker, I can direct my client to the tag site and then to the rules and regulations of each district, but I can't interpret those. That's why I need people like Ty Embry and Jason Hill and others to help interpret that. But doggone it, we need to tell people, I'm about to buy this farm out there, and there's a center pivot out there that's working. I need to tell my buyer, you better go check with the Evergreen District, see if that permit's good, right? And what do you mean a permit? What's the Evergreen groundwater? They don't have a clue. That's what I've spit my tonsils out trying to get people to understand how important that is for years. All right. This is what I want to focus on my last few minutes. I think it's really important. 2015, look what it says. To me, I think it sums up kind of still where we are. Number one, on the other hand, Chapter 36 Texas Water Code currently prohibits a district from discriminating for or against an out-of-district permit in any way. That's kind of subjective. Good place to argue about it, right? How does that work? And the political will, no matter what it says, like in Wimberley, was against anybody transferring water around, right? I mean, you can't believe, remember, some of y'all might have been there. They had the first town hall meeting filled up the room, then they had, somebody said 2,000 people out in the parking lot. I had friends of mine that had a ranch down there for years, decent people, whose family were surgeons and things, basically be threatened by their neighbors because they were going to lease some of their groundwater to Buda. You know, of course, we know this much, that there's no right-of-way, right? Without eminent domain authority, you can't get it. I was lucky enough to be the expert that testified for Parks and Wildlife in the Fairfield Lake dispute when they tried to save Fairfield Lake State Park. One of the things that shocked me was one of the main folks that were thinking about buying that lake was going to transfer water from that lake to another lake that already had a pipeline back up to Dallas-Fort Worth. The estimate on that pipeline, I saw the documents, for 15 miles was $10 million a mile. That had a 30% contingency. I just got a quote on a 36-inch pipeline in Williamson County, $4 million a mile. Others in Williamson County, 42-inch, $6 million a mile. So think about where we are in that. How does that work out? Nobody's going to pay enough money for that water to make that thing pay for me as an investor, right? Plus, anybody who's against it is going to block that right-of-way all the way down the road, right? And we're stupid about right-of-way. I think you ought to go to landowners and instead of running it through their property, run it across the front of their property and do long-term ground leases with them, 40 and 50-year ground leases. Let them come in and out of that water line. It's not like an oil and gas line that'll melt people if it blows up. But be fair about it. That's why Vista Ridge worked pretty well. They didn't have a lot of disputes about that. You don't want that line coming through your property. Why is that? Because you're going to have maintenance people coming in and out, throwing beer bottles, throwing beer cans, messing up your hunting, and stealing your arrowheads. So it takes a little more, right, to drive. It takes a little more of a pipeline to be on the frontage of the highway, but it makes sense. Why fight those battles for years? I was an expert witness on the Katy Freeway expansion. 30 miles of lawsuits into Houston, 30 miles out to get a few feet on one side. It took us about 8 to 9 years. Think what's going on right now. I'm representing a cousin of mine. We're a Samsung plant in Taylor, which is the darndest thing I've ever seen in my life. They're going to now run the Samsung highway from 973 to 95. And an old land that's been in our family since 1876 all of a sudden is subject to a nightmare of being taken from us. It's always been farmland. So anyhow, back to this. So the pipeline project's the next thing we talk. There's no question that the state must find a way to balance the need for planning, the need to adjust groundwater withdrawal permits as necessary, and the need for certainty when large investments are required. Why would anybody in New York, or I guess California, mostly New York, go lend $50 million to a deal when they're not sure how long the permit's going to last, right? How can you do that? Somebody's going to make sure that they're not going to, I'm not Elon Musk or king of the world, Jeff Bezos. My personal signature is no good for that kind of money. So they're going to want to make sure their I's are crossed, their T's are, all that. I's are dotted and T's are crossed. They're going to get some collateral on that. But it puts y'all in a tough position, right? To give a long-term permit. Everybody's going to argue about that. The balance, however, must include ensuring all well owners are treated the same without discriminating for or against anyone based on the place or purpose for the use of the groundwater. Providing different permit conditions based on the amount of withdrawal, the point of withdrawal, the rate of withdrawal, or the pumping history are allowed under Chapter 36, but changes must be based on sound science and potential impacts of the aquifer. And the sound science is where it is. It costs a lot of money for that science, right? And it's not easy to do because every aquifer is a little bit different, right? You got to spend a lot of money. But we got to base our plans and our future on science. And the people of Texas need to stand up and say, okay, we can give all this money for things I don't think they should use the money for. Let's give it to the most important thing. So you can then go argue about some of these issues we see now that are controversial in my life. If I don't want to bring up. But, you can't talk about those issues if you don't have water. You can't argue about those issues if you don't have water, right? So you better pay attention to it. We never need to speak at, need to understand to support those kind of things. Now, in my closing remarks, the stark reality of right-of-way acquisition is on top of us. I used to hold up 2 reports, one from the Water Development Board, one from TCEQ, big, thick reports. Right-of-way acquisition, right-of-way phrase was not in those reports. They had all this great planning, but they didn't figure out it could take 8 to 10 years for right-of-way. Think about it right now. Ben, back to that desal plant. It takes 14 years. If we start it right now and say we had the right-of-way, it'll take 14 years for that to start pumping water up from the Gulf. And some of you may not want that. I see that as a long-term future in the long future. I'm 72. I'd like to be here at 86 to see if it happens, but it ain't happening yet. Every year it goes further. Tom Hatfield, a friend of mine, is 90 years old and healthy as he can be. I'd like to be there. I want to see it sometime. But that doesn't mean we won't still use our groundwater anyway, right? And all that's got to be done in an environmentally sustainable way. Ed and I wrote this article for UT Law School in 2016 about valuation. In the last year, it's come more and more up in my work as an expert to help people value. I do a broker's price opinion of groundwater and surface water rights. What do they value? How they value it? How you figure it out? And it's real controversial and a lot of argument about it. Because it's hard, the biggest thing when you start coming up with compare values is pairing true comparables. And there's a big difference between comparables in one county, right? And that's the key to making it true. And a lot of our appraisers, not a lot, some are MAI, made as instructed. And a guy like me, like Dirk said a minute ago, I tell it like it is. I tell it like it is. No matter, my duty when I'm an expert witness, not to the client, to the judge and jury, to help share them and make them think about the questions that should be asked. If you decide to sell your land, would you add the value of your groundwater to the asking price? Of course. Would your ability to transfer or deliver that water out of the groundwater become a factor? Sure is, because guess what? They're not going to come truck that water away from you. I disappointed a lot of people the last couple of years when they thought they had this great water source, thinking that somebody come truck it away from them. Ain't going to happen. Those days are gone. And what's the value of the groundwater you own? If you can't move it out to that end user, it's only what you can use it for on your property, right? And in that article, I talked about all the different, what $7 corn, what that make the value of the water worth. We know about the Bragg case, what we thought the water's worth there because of the pecan orchards. All that comes back to that, more holistic approach to the whole thing. Again, I want to stress that time is the essence. What can we do? Inform all Texans about the Groundwater District and visit their websites. Continue with all efforts to inform the public by adding detailed groundwater disclosures to the TREC promulgated contracts. If you ever get a chance, some member of the House or Senate from your area, go tell them about that. That we got a propane paragraph in there, the Hank Hill propane paragraph. If you're in a propane district, not one thing about water, groundwater, surface water. It needs to be in those contracts. It needs to be in the contract while people are making their decision to purchase. They need to look into that, right? They need to understand that. Third, I think you talked to me about the title company. We can solve everything. The commitment for title insurance, which if you don't know what that is, when you go put something under a contract, the title company gives you a commitment for title insurance. Schedule B tells you all the exceptions. We'll insure this title except for this easement, this, that, and the other thing. Just put it in there. Wilson County says subject to the septic tank regulations. Why can't they say subject to the groundwater district? Encourage the public to go to your groundwater district meetings and participate. Don't make them feel like the Maytag repairman from an old TV commercial. I tell every broker, if you're going to be a farm and ranch broker, and I'm very active in the Texas Alliance of Land Brokers, I've got their education, I do their education program, get your butts to the Groundwater Conservation District meetings every time, no matter what. If you're going to be a farm and ranch broker, you better go, okay? Encourage the public to get to know their staff, and encourage your neighbors to register the wells and meter to determine the amount of water used. Some of you have heard that old story. This gigantic farmer looked like Ray Nitschke, come up to me in Brenham several times and said, Porter, I'm not going to put a meter on my well. He had hands like a catcher's mitts. He'd get right in my face wearing overalls. The last time we did, he came up and said, I finally listened to you. I'm sorry I intimidated you. I put a meter on my well because I know someday the rules will change, and Texas has not a problem, but has a history of honoring historic uses. And I'll have some kind of proof of how much water I've used. Y'all need that, right, to understand what's being out there, right? That's why I encourage you to, if you need help, I'll be glad to help you. Like Dirk has things for realtors. Gary Westbrook has things for realtors. The realtor can be a big source. The real estate agents, realtors are National Association of Realtors members. Real estate can be a big source for you. They can be your eyes and ears out there. And I don't think we've had a problem in any of those relationships with them. All right. I'll end. George Brackenridge, pretty familiar down here, right? Brackenridge Park. Muni Golf Course in Austin was given. Wrote a part of my book about him. That's true from an old little slip he had. I found in the Austin History Center a note he wrote to his brother who had invested in land in Junction, Texas. Said, if you sell the sections, make sure the section that has the water on it goes with them, because water renders the land its value. Water renders the land its value. And I can say right now, groundwater renders the land its value. Thank you all very much.